Кравченка. Пані і панове, дорогі друзі, first of all, some words in Ukrainian and at least. Мені дуже приємно вас тут бачити і дякую за запрошення і Канадському інституту українських студій, і, зокрема, і програмі сучасних досліджень. That's very important. I'm pleased to be here after the very long break of 13 years. This is my only fifth visit to Edmonton, Alberta, but I hope that not the last. My presentation covers some issues because it's a very vast topic. There are very many views, approaches, points of view are confront each other, and there are no consensus in the academia world and around. But it's very important for Ukraine's sake because ethnicity matters. Sometimes scholars wrote and write still that ethnicity is of low importance because it's not the most important issue in self-identification, self-perception, and communicating of each other for the people. But it's not true because for Ukraine, and especially for the delayed nation with sense of statehood and nationhood, this question remains still important, as well as for our surroundings, because a lot of issues which are now, so to say, hot issues are originated in the ethnicity, ethnos, and inter-ethnic relations or conflicts. Why it is important, as said, because we are in troubled time in Ukraine and around Ukraine, not only Ukraine. Ukraine could be placed on the fore, but not the only country which suffers of domestic and foreign problems. And very important issue is the 2014 impact after the Revolution of Dignity, which immediately conveyed with the Russian annexation of Crimea and war on Donbass, where the inter-ethnic relations played a role and had been used as a prediction, well, not as a kind of a reason to intervene under the banner of protecting Russian-speaking population or so-called competitors from the side of Russian Federation. And Ukraine has a very interesting combination of ethnos. I mean, the 75% approximately are of Ukrainian stock in Ukraine due to the census of 2001, and the rest, also a quarter of population, it is other minorities. Of them, the biggest one is Russians. Previously, they were even bigger one community, but now they are diminishing, and it was around 70% of the Ukrainian population. So there are some other, for instance, Belarusians, Crimean Tatars, Poles, and Jews, and so on and so forth. But in generally speaking, Ukraine has to consider, is this an asset for the country, future, and for sure, recent and present and future development, or this is rather a challenge? How to deal with this multi-ethnicity polyculturalism? It's still an open question. And theoretical approaches are plenty of in Ukraine, including the primordial approaches, including constructivist approaches, and especially now in Ukraine, the constructivism gets more popularity amidst all the approaches. And for sure, Ukrainian scholars, and not only Ukrainian scholars, are interested to research on the ethnopolitical issues, ethnic issues from different theoretical prospects. From the point of history, cultural studies, politics, public administrations, sociology for sure, and so on and so forth. But it's very hard to deal with the topic because Ukraine lacks provable data with regard to the ethnic composition of country and other problems. I mean, the last and the oldest census took place in Ukraine only at 2001. So far, the figures from that census are mainly outdated, awfully, but we didn't have more fresh data except the data regarding the sociological polls, which are more or less regularly conducted in the country, with sometimes provable sociological institutes and sometimes fake institutions. So there are a lot of discussions to what extent this data could be exploited or explored by the scholars and by the community. And a very important question is the ethnic composition of Ukraine. I will touch upon these issues because the very problem is whose Ukraine is it now. For instance, I would like to say that the earliest written sample about Kyiv it is a point of a Jewish scholar Sprout, has been a letter from the local Jewish community to the Israel with some request for the spiritual support and other needs of the local community. So far, this is the question of who is the eldest in Ukraine. Yeah, this is the question. Some remarks of Ukrainian self-perception. We and them interplay. This is very important. For Ukrainians, there are a lot of significant others, likewise Poles, inside the country Jews, but to a great extent, the most important figure Ukrainians counteract and compare themselves with, this is the Russians for sure. That's the most important challenge, and the mirror Ukrainians use to compare themselves and to share and to define their distinctiveness. Why they are different, and so as usually the ground for the differentiation is Russian culture, Russian identity, Russian behavior. And you can see their dynamics of the attitudes. That's very interesting that by the way, that in Ukraine usually Ukrainians are much better predisposed to the Russians than the Russians to Ukrainians. And this trend is still at place. Even the latest showing that Ukrainians are getting better to Russians than Russians to Ukrainians, but it's another story. I don't like to stuck with that. Awfully important, besides the history of the different states on the territory of Ukraine, including Austro-Hungarian or before that Austrian Empire and Russian Empire, this is the Soviet period. The Soviet period, I'd like to slightly consider it because it left a lot of myths about the Ukrainian ethnia, Ukrainian nationhood, Ukrainian statehood. Likewise, for instance, some in Ukraine could say that we are to be thankful to Joseph Stalin as the true collector of Ukrainian lands. That Ukrainians got their current shape, except the annexation of Crimea, I mean, for sure, because of Joseph Stalin, who, first of all, recollected Western Ukrainian lands, then Zakarpattia, and only Nikita Khrushchev added of Crimea, then Vladimir Putin just stripped it off of us, yeah? But that is the myth that we are to be thankful to Joseph Stalin, who, in effect, recollected Ukrainian lands. Of course, we know the price paid for that, and I'm sure that Stalin never considered Ukrainian national or nationalistic project as his own, and he pursued and quite another purposes. And again, key features of Soviet national policy, so-called, or ethno-national in more current words. That was a great project of bright, shining, and leading all the mankind behind a Soviet glorious future appointed to the communism. And in this project, that was the idea that all nations are destined to be merged in one whatever new kind of mankind, and Russia and USSR, but namely Russia, leads all the world behind to this brilliant goal. And from that point of view, it's very interesting to see that how this great narration and great project was gradually converted into the idea of Greater Russia. It started all very obvious from the needs of the so-called Great Patriotic War or Second World War in Russia, when Stalin started to explore Russian imperial symbols, including the uniform of Russian military officers and soldiers, and concluding with the different orders of imperial commanders-in-chiefs, heroes of Russian Empire, like Kutuzov, Suvorov, and Nevsky, and Alexandrovsky, and so on. So Russian greatness and inclusiveness re-emerged from within the USSR, and indeed it was a real content of the Soviet national policy, not the so-called proletariat internationalism. And it was very interesting. This is a mistake. It's routinization policy. I'm sorry. I didn't change it before the presentation. Routinization or korenizatsiya in Ukraine. Korenizatsiya. In 20s, after the civil war, when Bolsheviks discovered that their authority and their presence in some so-called national outskirts are not so well supported by locals, they understood that they have to make the Soviet power shaped and adapted towards the local communities with their traditions, customs, and language. And from that time, for a short period of 20s, Ukrainian culture has been officially supported with Bolsheviks, with of course, the Soviet content of that. But this period lasted for a very short period, and after the great turn of Stalin, I mean 1929, Stalin gradually, abolished his previous policy. I remember, for instance, a very interesting case when the delegates from Donetsk Oblast came to Stalin and complained to him, Tavarish Stalin, Comrade Stalin, it's so crazy. We beaten this Petlurivtsi in the civil war, and now we have to learn this Petlurivtsi language. And Stalin explained them, comrades, you are not right. It's not a language of Petlurivtsi, it is a language of great Shevchenko, Lesya Ukrainka. Should I be in Ukraine, I would be proud to learn this language. So should do you. Come back and do as I want you. But this was for sure a kind of pretense and hypocrisy to a very extent. And then later, it was a soft and hard ways of Russification policy applied towards the Ukraine, as well as to the rest of the Soviet Socialist republics. Under the coverage of first proletarian and later since 50s Soviet internationalism, when USSR gradually proclaims itself to be not a proletariat dictatorships, but the all people state. People belong to all people because the exploiters were exterminated. So far, no antagonism existed. So on, this all nations are united. So far, we are not proletariat dictatorship for now, but Soviet. What happened with Ukraine? First of all, I would like to stress the very important trend that under the Soviet rule, Ukrainians did not flourish. They were diminishing all the time, and sometimes quite dramatically. Especially, I would name the period of famine and the period of collectivization and industrialization, and then the very bad was the years of Second World War. Around 8 million of Ukrainians lost their lives. And nobody knows how many were just oppressed, suppressed, sent to Siberia, or just killed by the Soviet regime. So far, democracy was not complementary for Ukrainian nationhood at the time, and Ukrainians started to gradually be less numerical, less important than they were before in the beginning of the 20th century. Then a very important part, it is a Soviet industrialization period. Because of that was a continuation of Russian imperial industrialization, by the way. But from that point of view of the continuity, the Ukrainian society has been split into the growing industrial or urban societies and rural, so peripheral and mainly Ukrainian communities. So far, this partition into two factions of the Ukrainians, by the way, plus some additives of Russian settlers from the inner Russian territories and others, led to the fact that Ukrainian cities became to be less of all Ukrainians and mostly Russified. And only urban landscape remained more or less traditional Ukrainian. It means a lot of priorities for Russian culture as superior, the higher culture, and Ukrainian culture treated by Soviets, especially after the Second World War and death of Stalin, as acceptable to an extent, but only as a minor one, as the pure folklore culture, and just as a kind of remnants of the previous epoch, on the way to the brilliant, as I mentioned, the merger of all nations. Linguistic priorities has been set for Russian languages. And I would not say that it is only the authority fault. Because I remember once upon a time I touched upon my very important in my life city, Kremenchuk of Poltava region. I saw the same situations there. When the first Ukrainian republic, Ukrainska Narodna Republika, came into existence, the first founders of them asked local people to choose the language, and they proposed for sure Ukrainian language. But the parents there revolted, Kremenchuk, against that. They say, what? We have to learn this peasant language? We want to see our children well educated and with good prospect in their life. So far, it repeated very many times because due to the Soviet law, it was a competence of the parents to choose the language of education. And the Soviet law has granted to the parents a lot of different reservations with regard to this option. So if you are, for instance, the daughters or sons of military officers serving all around USSR plus Soviet bloc, so please don't learn local languages. If you don't like to learn the local languages, please don't do it at all. So far, Russification was very successful to an extent from the point of view of Kremlin elite, because it was accepted like just a matter of the voluntary choice of the local peoples, not the something implied from above. So that is a choice, and we are sorry, but could we do anything? It's a democratic practice so far. It's fine. Elite absorption, because all the time, starting from the Russian imperial and other imperial statehoods, Ukrainian elites, cultural, intellectuals, social, have been permanently integrated in the high elite of the country, and I mean Moscow. And many of Ukrainian artists, scholars, teachers, whoever, they continue their careers far away of their native lands. And regionalization of collective historic memories, that had a lot of consequences and for sure solid grounds for that, but Soviet Union cultivates this split of west-east of the country and try to assess that, you see, Westerners, so to say, they are dangerous for you. That is secondary in quality of Ukrainians, but true Ukrainians is this one which lived under Russian Empire, Russian Tsardom, and then USSR. That was, in effect, very interesting to discover more by archives and other materials, but still, I would insist that USSR policy encouraged that split of the country, West-East dichotomy and division. Now, and finally, engagement of minorities into greater state narrative. It's a very important point too. For instance, a major part of Ukrainian Soviet Jews who then time lived on the territory of USSR, Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, they related themselves not so much to the land, and for sure not to the culture of the natives, I mean Ukrainians, but to the culture of Russians and greater statehood construction. So they were supporters, as it happened before, by the way, when I started Bucovina in Galicia, Jews do the same. They were Kulturträgers of Österreich on these lands. That's very interesting, but it's important to understand. The same happened with other minorities. By the way, it happened with the Ukrainian diaspora, I mean, so to say, now it is diaspora. Ukrainian colonists in the far east of Russia, or Ukrainian colonists in the Siberia or Kazakhstan and others, being as usually not militarily resettled there, they had to be integrated with something important, valuable, and strong. So for they were integrated with Russians and help them to colonize local communities and Russify them. This is very interesting irony of history. And hierarchy of ethnic groups. On the one hand, I would say that it's historically, and this is true because here are some professional historians, I hope that they did not disclaim me with that statement. Historically, Ukrainians have been treated in Russian Empire and Soviet Union as second after Russians. Immediately second. But still second. So they were treated as a core land in historical memory of Russians. So Kiev, Mater Ruskich, and so on. So Kiev is the mother of the Russian towns, and so on, so forth. But still, they were second after Russians. And the same happened with the Soviet Ukraine, where Russians first were placed in the highest positions. Then later, after the Great War and Stalin death, the tradition changed a bit. Therefore, in the party committee and other bodies of power, now it was time for Ukrainians to be the first position, and second secretary was as usual Russian. A kind of eye of the Tsar, yeah? Looking upon the territories from the point of view of Kremlin. But still. And other groups were lower in this informal hierarchy. Never and nobody proclaimed that this is a hierarchy, but it served and it worked. And then, when Ukraine started to the new period of its independent history, it faced with a lot of challenges. And I don't like to speculate now about the preparedness of Ukrainian society to the independence. It was of low standard, I would say. Then I don't like to say, but let me just remind you and recall that Ukrainian elite was composed mainly and predominantly of nomenclature. And the nomenclature succeeded to successfully kept a power upon the country, and some of the newcomers from national democrats or nationalists were just incorporated in the new nomenclature of Ukraine. So, but still, coming to the topic. So, first of all, Ukraine has a lot of territorial debates with neighboring countries, primarily with Russia, especially upon Crimea. It started from the very beginning. Let me recall the Russian parliament decision at 1993 do not recognize the legitimacy of Ukrainian authority upon Crimea. It was official announcement and decree of Russian parliament. Then we have some problems with Poland because of Wschodnie Kresy, the eastern territories, which fortunately were soon resolved. Much longer continues our debates with Romania upon the territory of former Bucovina and northern Bucovina now, Chernivtsi Oblast and Bessarabia. And this issue has been more or less resolved with the so-called Great Treaty concluded of Bucharest and Kiev at 1997. But still there are some, distrust and some hidden, tensions with regard of these territorial issues. For sure, it is an issue of Hungary-Ukrainian, relation with regard to Transcarpathia or Zakarpattia in Ukrainian language. I'm speaking about these small but communities of Hungarians, which Hungary regarded to be a true protector, and some other but less important conflicts. So, and all of these conflicts were colored with ethno-national overtones. Because Russians said, look, Crimea is settled with the Russian vast majority, approximately 68% before the census of 2001. So, and east of Ukraine and south of Ukraine is well represented with the bigger Russian communities and majorities. And plus Russia started to exploit after Putin coming into the power that russo-говорящие, Russian-speaking, it is to our competitors. Russia issued a law on competitors and decided that Russia is the only country to defend its competitors, who are automatically to be whoever who speaks Russian. That was a very intriguing manipulation. So because of all these features, including local and regional secessionist movements, likewise Crimean secessionism or separatism, Transcarpathian secessionism, to an extent Bucovinian, and even on Donbass, that was a kind of rebirth for the very brief idea of Krivorozhsko-Donetska Respublika, Kryvyi Rih and Donetsk Republic of civil war. So far, this was a kind of a challenging time for Ukraine, and Ukraine started to be very cautious with the ethnopolitical issues from the very beginning. So we accepted, first of all, zero citizenship policy. So we said that anybody who is living or related to Ukraine could be a citizen of Ukraine, please. Then we accepted the return of Crimean Tatars to their motherland, Crimea, and do other steps. In the first decade of Ukrainian ethnopolitics, laws and decrees of Ukraine were in the strict compliance with OSCE, Council of Europe, and later to an extent with the EU regulations concerning minorities issues. So far, Ukraine succeeded to do it. There was established an institution of ethnopolitics in the political center, Kiev. Gradually, first it has appeared the State Committee of Ethnic Relations and Migrations. Then the committee has been promoted to the rank of Ministry of, nationalities issues and migration. And in the ministry has been, developing the structure of their regional representations, especially in the polycultural regions, including Zakarpattia, Chernivtsi, Odessa, and so on and so forth. And finally, the government tried to explore different kinds of dialogues and cooperative forms with civic society, mainly with minority organizations. There was established a council on minority issues with the president above all, and then there was some auxiliary consultative bodies with the cabinet of ministers. So far it was a kind of dialogue on these topics. And you see that this is the only census I don't like to put a lot of attention, because Kruglashov warned me about the limitation of time and our presence in this nice audience. Then in 2001, we fortunately held a new independent census. And comparing with 1989 census, the last Soviet census, we discovered that, first of all, we lost a bit of population, yeah, around 4 million approximately, but there were very interesting things. Before that, Russians exceeded 20%, and gradually they were diminishing. And the Russian media started to alarm that what happened with our competitors in Ukraine. Facts are that we don't see any mass exodus of Russians from Ukraine. Likewise, it happened at Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and some other countries, and Azerbaijan included. Russians did not leave Ukraine in mass. Then, what happened? Do they immigrate to other countries? Not so much. To the same extent like Ukrainians did, and so on. So the enigmatic but more or less realistic approach is the dual identity of many who proclaimed before in Soviet censuses to be Russians. As usually it was children of the mixed families. Father is Russian, mother is Ukrainian, or vice versa, or partly Belarusian and Ukrainian. So, and for them, the government in the Soviet era, last decades, kindly and tacitly supported the idea, choose the better identity. So the better and the best identity, not the better, the best, it was Russian identity. So many of these people just preferred to be Russians, because it opened up the door or the window of opportunity for career, ladder of the career, whatever. So that was very profitable. But then, when the USSR broke down, these, incentives, disappeared and evaporated. So for many of them, because of, by the way, Kravchuk decree of the possibility to change your identity, they returned to their more comfortable for now identity. So they prefer to be Ukrainians or Belarusians or Jews. By the way, that was a big claim of being Jews, because of emigration towards Israel and other countries, including Germany. So far, that's why so many Russians, comparatively so many, changed their identity. Not because they were beaten, threatened, or whatever wrong happened with them. I am going further. In the same time, the demography of Ukraine, and I'd like to say about the objective features of ethnic relations, it's not so good, because Ukraine started with 52 millions. Now it's rather about 40, 41 at maximum, including the temporarily occupied territories and annexed Crimea. So why it's happened? Because of very many reasons. This is a death rate. So still, the death rate in Ukraine, this is the density of this rate. The more reddish is the higher level of death, the a bit lighter, lower rate. But still we have a very negative trends with regard to our demography. Death rate, birth rate, and so on and so forth. Here you see about our fertility. Okay, it's on the one hand, it's typical for any, so to say, developed country, yeah? But in the same time, it's about the, trust of the future of the country, the preparedness to invest into your children, your child, and you see this line, and you see how it changed the last years, and it corresponds directly, first and foremost, with the GDP trends. When Ukraine lost more than a half of GDP in comparison with 1991, and unfortunately and shamefully for Ukraine, and me too, that the 1990 as a ground for comparisons for stats, still as a so to say a horizon of our expectations. We never approached that level, still, for the 28 years of independence. So far, fertility is highly related not only to the social, political, but economical factors in Ukraine. You see, I just want to say that this is a regional distribution of our, so to say, wealth. Well, Ukraine is now a tourist country in Europe, not in the world. And here is my colleague from Moldova. We are competing who is the first in this rating. Moldova, Ukraine. Sometimes we are changing our position. So, but still, I would like to just to stress that inter-ethnic tensions aren't so directly related to the regional peculiarities. For sure, it is determined to an extent, but you can see that some of the regions where the tensions are high are bad, very poor with regard to poverty. Some of the regions are more or less related to well-doing, but there are now some problems. So far, it's not a direct, ties and linkage. It's a much more complicated issue. But still, the poverty and the very problem with just to survive, it is a very ground for the ethnic tensions and some claims made from the minorities especially. And especially when minorities compare themselves with their competitors abroad. I mean, for instance, we still do not reach, for instance, the level of salaries as it is in Russia, for instance, in Ukraine. We are lower. Then, it's important for Russians and the Russian-speaking population, especially the east and south of Ukraine, this comparison. Then, for Romanians in Bucovina, our Ukrainian Bucovina, they are comparing themselves with their competitors in Romania, mainland. So far, it's again not profitable. When Hungarians compare themselves with Hungarians in Hungary, well, Poles in Ukraine compare themselves with Poles in Poland, it's 3-4 times more. I mean, it's the average salary. So far, this is a ground for some jealousy and some disaffection and disillusionment, with Ukrainian economical situation. And language. I'm not a linguist, I'm not a philologist, I don't like to talk about the topic too much. But you see, this is a, so to say, regional distribution of Russian and Ukrainian speaking communities, so to say, in general. This is valid as far as 2003. And you see that East is predominantly, before that Orange Revolution, and South predominantly Russian speakers, Center is in between. So East Center and West are mainly Ukrainian speakers. It happened, I will later discover some news data, but that was a tendency. That Ukraine has been not so much united, but split by the linguistic divisions or cleavages. So the western part are Ukrainian speaking Ukrainophones, the other are mainly Russian speaking. And this is a very problem, because from that side, where, by the way, the referendum of independence demonstrated pretty big support for the idea of independent Ukraine, but mainly based not on the ground of culture and identity, mainly based on the ground of the economic expectations. So when we were cut off the Russia, so we would flourish instantly. That was very naive but widespread expectations. And identity issues, you see that this is another question, because language and identity are awfully intertwined and related to each other, but still we have that Ukrainians are around, as I said, 77% and more, Russians are 70%, and you see that Crimea, that happened, that is data of the last census. It is the last provable data. But what I would say since that, it's about this census. The next census had to be organized at 2011, but it wasn't. What happened? That time, Yanukovych's first year was in power, and to an extent, it is not just a kind of conspiracy theory, but it's a kind of revelation too. He was asked not to conduct the census. And the government of Azarov decided to move out the census 2 years later, 2013. But in that year again, Azarov government chose the option again to postpone the census. What's the matter? in my personal opinion, I spoke this in that years it could be checked up. So my opinion is that looking at the tendencies in Ukraine, where the Ukrainian identity grew up steadily, maybe not so fast that the Ukrainians wanted it, yeah, but steadily grew. So Russians were much more worried about that. The next census could just diminish their, role of protectors of Russian speakers and Russians. Even in Crimea, my expectation, this is my hypothesis, of course, that if or should the census took place at the right time, 11 or 13, it doesn't matter, the results were disappointing for Russia. You remember that when Crimea has been occupied with Russian military forces, first time Putin said that we are not there, that it's not our soldiers, this is theirs heroic opolchenцы, yeah? Self-defenders. Later, in his proverbial movie, Crimea, the way to home, yeah? It's my translation, maybe I'm wrong with the more correct English translation, but Krim, шлях додому, Putin boldly and with great pride said that we became cautious about Crimea return and started preparation to that operation no less than 10 years before. So my opinion and my assumption and my statement is that this census was postponed to pave a way for Putin annexations and Putin manipulations, because figures would be quite opposite to the myth of the greater Russianness and the Russian representation in Ukraine, even in Crimea. This is a percentage of Ukrainian population all above Ukraine. You see that identity of all the regions are more or less, different. I mean, Russian language. So, and Donetsk and Luhansk, the territories of now this so-called rebelled Luhansk and Donetsk people republics. So the major parts there were comparatively with Crimea, Russian speakers. It allowed for Russian media, with the tacit agreement of Ukrainian Kiev authority, to spread over the regions their influence, to put their presence in everyday life of locals, Ukrainians, I would say Ukrainians, and to present Russian culture as, again, superior, boastful, and dominated. Matter of identities, again, some data. The first, we see, it's about, let's say, ethnicity. But the second, of 2004, a bit later, sociological poll shows that there were a lot of similarities, again, amidst Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine. By the way, that year, sociological polls demonstrated that the major part of Ukrainians believed in the triangle of Russia, Ukraine, Belarus as the best way. And you see there was still a solid identity, not so important, but still, especially on the east, you see it. And the very important identity was the identity of the region. Especially, again, you can see where it is widespread. Again, east. So far, it is interesting moments which were lost by the Ukrainian government to react timely on that. And again, very important point, it is the trends with regard to the proud of being Ukrainian citizens. So now it's not about the ethnicity, now it's about citizenship, because I omitted one point that conceptually, when Ukrainian statehood started to deal with the ethno-national policy, after different discussion of first years, we choose in favor of the political nation concept rather than cultural nations. I mean officially. By the matter of legislation, conceptual documents, and other steps. But again, both for politicians and scholars, it remains an open question. How to balance, how to, meet these ends of this claim of building up the political nation and in the same time preserving culture of a titular nation. This is still open question. But see that the positive, proud to be Ukrainian citizens, lineage It is, so the kind of consensus emerged after the Euromaidan. The level of proudness with being Ukrainian citizen gets a momentum, I would say. And before it was different, situation, you see. You could compare, it's visible. I don't like comment too much what is quite visible. And again, ethno-linguistical division. So you can see there are different points, and that is interesting that you see that traditionally we speaking that Ukrainian West is predominantly Ukrainian forms. But you see Zakarpattia, it has some peculiarities too, because of Hungarians. I will later cover a bit this issue. And there are a lot of regions which are, so to say, placed in between, in sense of their linguistic skills. And for sure, major part of Ukrainians are bilingual. That's true. This is a feature of Ukrainians. A major part of monolingual lives in the Galicia, and Russophones are living, except Crimea, for sure, east and south of Ukraine. But again, they are, as usually, mixed. They both use both languages, more or less. And is ethno-national relation on the eve of 2014. First of all, I don't know why. There are a lot of reasons. I could interpret them and explain, but in the next decade of the Ukrainian, I don't touch so many questions. In the next decade of Ukrainian statehood, suddenly the authority just lacked any enthusiasm about ethno-national policy. It happened with many regards. First of all, the perpetual demolition of the state structures which are responsible or are of charge of ethno-national. First of all, the ministry was dismantled, then re-emerged committee, then the committee has been closed. Instead of committee of ethnic relations, it appeared just a department moment, and the Ministry of Justice, and later it moved finally to the Ministry of Culture as the only department dealing with the ethno-national issues. Then legislation initiatives stopped, except the proverbial Kivalov-Kolesnichenko law on the regional languages, and decay of any interest from the state side towards the ethno-national issues, because the new methods created that looked, maybe we are poor, maybe we are living with low standards, but we are peaceful, we are calm, we have no major conflicts including ethno-national, so why to care about that too much? That happened on the eve of, and then, but see, the population looked at that with a growing, maybe not so dominant, but worse. You can see that when the state evacuated, so its presence from this sphere, the citizens started to worry about that. And you can see it's obvious. And finally, Ukraine after Euromaidan. First of all, I would like to stress that Euromaidan, where many of my friends, including my son, stood there, it wasn't a narrow ethno-nationalist movement. It was rather a civic movement where any languages has been appreciated, and many of victims of Euromaidan and in Nebesna Sotnya, they came from different stock. Armenians, Belarusians, Jews, Ukrainians, Russians, or Russian-speaking Ukrainians, it doesn't matter. Russia blackmailed the time Ukrainian protesters, saying that they are neo-nationalists, they are extremists, they are anti-Zionists, they are whatever else. In major part it was just false assumption. But in the same time, after the first escalation, of course, a certain turn to the far right appeared and emerged in Ukrainian politics and ethnopolitics too. It shouldn't be ignored. And the government, new government, after the Yanukovych escape of the country or evacuation with the Russian secret forces, so they issued just immediate ban of this proverbial but negatively perceived with Ukrainian society Kolesnichenko-Kivalov law. But immediately it was treated with Russian media and Eastern southern Ukraine as alarming signals that so it is radicals and extreme nationalists came to the power and they tried to just to extend our rights and we are now suppressed and ignored. You know, I don't like to cover all the points because it's not possible. And for the ethno-national perception of Ukrainians, it is very important to stress the guidance of the geopolitical orientation. Ukraine is divided, including the ethno-national dimensions, with a geopolitical orientation, which played a final decisive role with these identities, both national, ethnic, sorry, not both, but and the third, for sure, political. So if you see that this part of Ukraine is mainly looking westward towards the European and Euro-Atlantic integration of Ukraine. This part, not all east of Ukraine, traditionally has been mostly oriented towards Russia, economically, culturally, mentally. And this part is, so to say, ambivalent Ukraine, which fluctuates depending on the situation and looked both west and east, where is better. East or west home is best, yeah. And educational policy of nowadays Ukraine. This is a very important issue because on the one hand, after the revolution, we saw a real radical turn towards the new turn of Ukrainization. When we came to the forefront of this confrontation with Russia, we understood that the ignorance towards the cultural and educational policy in the eastern and southern regions paved a way and created a negative ground for that speculation of secessionist and, so to say, rebellious movement. And but nonetheless, the new law of 2013, provoked a lot of confrontation. I omitted Russia because Russian reaction was, well known and quite negative for anything what happened in Ukraine except the worst case scenario. They will applaud immediately. But it was opposition from Hungary, Romania, less severe criticism from Poland and Bulgaria. What happened? Because the new law of education suggested that after the primary school, the pupils or students of school, of junior high, high school, we don't have so strict division in Ukraine, but now it is getting more closer to the Western system of education. So they have to learn more subjects, more courses in Ukrainian and keeping less attention towards their native tongue. So from that point of view, these countries oppose, strongly saying that this is a discrimination. This is against the preservance of the national identity of their competitors living in Ukraine, and they are not agree. The worst tensions happen to be with Hungary, but less tense with Romania, but still. And I have to admit this slide, old law. You see that there is for sure identity and linguistic issues a component of the Russian plot against Ukraine. But let me say just shortly or briefly, I visited that region before 2014 several times and spent there a lot of times. In Donetsk, for instance, and surroundings. And I did not see there any widespread secessionist or separatist movement. So despite all these cleavages and despite all the faults of central government, as that was Russia, a decisive factor of that happened there. Ukrainians rate in the all of regions. It's more fresh data. You see that it's like that. And we see that Ukrainian identity is going higher now, especially after the Euromaidan. It turned back this certain prestige of Ukrainian culture, history, and so on. But this trend is not so solid as it might be expected. And I'd like just to touch upon some most problematic regions except Ordo and Crimea, because this is a very, very vast topic to discuss. Transcarpathia case. Initially, in the beginning of independence, they faced with the Ruthenes issues and their claims of autonomy or maybe even total independence. You know that here in Canada is the very famous Professor Paul Robert Magocci. I am acquainted with him too. He wrote a lot of books on that topics, proclaiming that Ruthenes are the fourth Eastern Slav nations. It's a debatable issue. For me, it is a relic identity, but it's for me. While the major part of Ukrainian scholars recognizes that Ruthenian language and culture has certain peculiarities, as well as other, subnational identities. But I would say that due to the objective facts, Russians are not a factor. It should not they get some support from abroad, Russia first primarily, this issue is not so hot. But Hungarians of the regions, this is the issue. Because first of all, they are living in a very decent areas, and for the years of independence, they were eager and successfully made a kind of head-off for themselves. They have a completed system of isolated education, starting from kindergarten, schools, and higher education, I mean universities. They don't like to learn Ukrainian. They treated Ukrainian language from the superior position, and they got, especially for last decade, a growing political support from the populist and nationalist parties of Hungary, including the dual citizenship and so on and so forth. Why the ethnic composition is portrayed here? But because of the compact, Hungarian communities, they are consolidated, and this is a very threatening factor, less of all the Romanians. Quite different situation, in certain aspect is Cherniv region. It is a multicultural region too. Once upon a time, Bucovina being a princehood or duchy in the framework of Austro-Hungarian Empire possesses a big status, and there were practically, parity of Ukrainians and Romanians. Now Ukrainians for sure prevail upon the Cherniv Oblast. They are around 3/4, but Romanians and Moldavians compose together around 20%. And I would say that a new trend happened there too with regard to the Moldavians. They became to change their identity in favor of Romanians' identity for various reasons. First of all, of a very, I would say, strong appealing position of Romanian government, which granted them a lot of privileges, including the pass of Romania, which is now the member of EU, and other incentives. And of course, there remains other minorities, but they are not so visible. Once upon a time, Jews were constituting, not a majority, but sometimes a majority, but a very important part of the urban landscape in Bucovina. Now they are just teeny minority. And again, it's very interesting that before the 2014 events and crisis, we treated there in Bucovina and in Ukraine that the biggest challenge for us is Romania. Now we discovered, with new facts, that Romania is much more pacified with tones and approaches towards Ukraine and Romanians in Bucovina, in Transcarpathia and Odessa regions, but it is Russia which indeed inspires a lot of turbulences in Bucovina and Transcarpathia and Odessa regions, using these ethnic relations and tensions, myths and stereotypes and mistrust to inflame some bad. In conclusion, I would say that Ukraine has a strong potential to build up a solid and healthy political nation, an effective state. But unfortunately, foreign factors required much more attention for both people and the government. Unfortunately, after the 2014, ethnopolitics remained a low priority for Ukrainian government, for various reasons. Only now, the first discussion of the new central body in their local representations came into the political agenda of Kyiv. Only now, but it's still not done. This is strange and weird for me. So far, institutional design should be reconsidered. Again, we don't have a strong civic platform for the dialogue of the minorities, majority, and civic societies, NGOs, communication. That's still remain. And civic education in Ukraine is ignored. By the way. It's a matter of the certain enthusiasm, some foreign funds, but not Ukrainian government. Only last year, First Minister of Education and Science proposed a concept of the civic education to discuss. And finally, a research agenda. This is my personal experience. When I got support from the Minister of Education, right in these crucial years, the first steps they done because of the military needs, demands, and so on, they cut down 3 times the budget for my research on the regional mechanism of ethnopolitics, new regional mechanism. So it was possible to conduct a good research under such a condition. But still, I remember that Vladimir Krasich is standing up and that's time to end up with my presentation and go to the questions and discussion. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much for your insightful and passionate presentation. And now it's time to ask you questions.
Yeah, it's just a sketch because the topic is too vast. Problems are plenty of. So far, I try to make a kind of a general observation and to put forward some points which deserve further attention.
May I start with one?
Sure.
Since I can see.
You have a privilege being a moderator.
I'm trying to avoid this, but
Okay.
Sometimes you didn't mention the concept of multiculturalism. Is it applicable to Ukraine? It seems to be that Canada is standing alone with this, some sort of Canadianness or Canadian special. But do you believe that that Ukraine is also somehow should consider this policy, ethnic policy?
Okay, I will try to point out how we are. What is my perception of that? First of all, I don't mind against Canadian multiculturalism, and I appreciate it. When at the same time in Ukraine we have a certain criticism among academicians with regard to Canadian multiculturalism, where we are teaching this multiculturalism as a rather milder way of ethnic assimilation. Milder. That's sorry, I'm just speaking about the general trend. In the same time, we have faced with these examples of much closer countries, I mean geographically and culturally, likewise France and Germany, where all the leaders said that this concept of multiculturalism failed completely. And Ukrainian society and the scholars, only partly politicians, they are not so much and involved in this discussion, they are respectful to this concept of multiculturalism, but it's not a mainstream for Ukraine. It's not a mainstream, neither in sense of academic discourse, nor less of all in sense of political discourse. And what we are trying to explore from that, we just are trying to explore more concept of polyculturalism, not multiculturalism, but polyculturalism. Maybe in certain there are some kind of our peculiarities.
What's the difference?
And the difference is that multiculturalism is born here, and polyculturalism is, so to say, the idea is that Ukrainian society is by definition and nature polycultural, and so we have to preserve these traits and to cultivate them to an extent which is not threatening to the security of state and society. So, but still, this concept is not well defined and elaborated.
Thank you. Any other questions? Let's see, and
I have a question about, because in one slide you showed it was a question about fears of ethnic conflicts. And for me it was kind of surprising, if I'm not wrong, maybe I...
What slide what was?
It was before like 2014 something, and it was
fear, expectations. Yeah,
73% of population indicate like by fear of ethnic conflicts. And
but you see that is not a strong fear.
But
it is certain worries about that it could take place.
And from which institution is it results? Do you remember? No, because like
Pew Research Center.
Okay. Because in general, as if like I can remember, the fear of ethnical conflicts was normally much lower in Ukraine, and actually it was not put on first agenda among main like fears during years. No, after 2014 situation is changed.
Yes.
But even after, it was not put like the point on ethnical elements. So. Is it really like, do you think in these kind of questions it was pointed the ethnical aspect, or it's something different?
It's about ethnic conflicts for sure. And you see that it's not anticipation of the conflict, but certain, certain fears, certain, precipitations that it could take place. This is a different story. And again, what I researched and published, by the way, in the first shift devoted to John Volhymka, we do some continued research in Chernivtsi region for the period comparable with that. And there was, on the one hand, we saw that the percent of people who expect a kind of clashes and skirmishes on the ground of ethnicity is very low. But the percentage of people who are partly worrying about that was much higher. And the very interesting point was that the most, I would say, frustrated, if you like, part of population were minorities. Minorities. In our region, and as well, and other, I could compare, but I didn't prepare this data, but they are. In this article, they are placed, for instance, it was a Journal of Ukrainian Studies publication, that the most vulnerable minorities felt themselves as a victim of this potent possible conflicts. It was Romanians, it was Moldavians, and I mean my communities, not there were Romanians, Moldavians, and plus Jews. Why Jews is few in the region. So, but they reacted with the strongest fear to the possible conflicts. But in general, statistically speaking, that was neglectable. So you see, but as I said, that for me these data are probable because I observed that in the same years, the public attention, the care of the state institutions towards these issues really decayed, diminished, were very low, in any sense. And maybe it was a kind of compensatory, expectation of people. Maybe they felt it in the atmosphere. It's sociology, you couldn't treat it as a quite, untouchable, it's a reflection, it's emotions, finally it's emotions. But these emotions, in my point of view, correspond, these emotions, with the real situation. And moreover, we used, many researchers, including Harkin, we use this Bohart scale, and other instruments of sociological, indicators, and they show that in these years, the tolerance of Ukrainians, Ukrainians in citizens, sense of polity, in sense not in ethnia. So the percentage of intolerance grew up on the everyday routine basis. So, and I even wrote an article in these years in Russian because it was an invitation from the Canon Institute, Canon Institute, Herald in Russia, as that intolerance as the payment for the civic passivity. So I tried to bound the intolerance growth and civic passivity of major Ukrainian citizens. So this is my explanation. But I would like to support these pools with other data. I just shown this picture to propose you the vision that because of the state evacuation from the field, it was, with different extremists, different, intolerant behavior models, and so on and so forth. There were a lot of factors.
How about ethnic passivity?
Ethnic passivity too, yeah.
Just a remark.
Yeah.
Sorry. What about the treatment of Ukrainians as an ethnic community in Russia? It's a large community of Ukrainians who are still disappearing. Does it have any impact on attitudes towards ethnic relations in Ukraine? Because of course the Russians are always accusing the Ukrainians that they're oppressing the Russian minority, which is kind of a joke.
Yeah.
Whereas in Russia, the Ukrainian minority is being quite clearly treated very badly. So, how aware are people? Does it have an impact back in Ukraine?
Well, I would say that this is a very interesting discussion. What I know, more or less for sure, because I touch upon this topic occasionally, but for instance, I do a presentation in Moldova on that topic, about Ukrainian diaspora, and including the so-called newborn Eastern diaspora. So, and the situation for Ukrainians in Russia are quite hostile. Russia made, before the conflict, by the way, in the very conscientious and a very logic manner, all the steps to dissolve Ukrainian community of their institutional capacity. Moreover, Russia contributed a lot towards a hatred towards Ukrainians. And for many of Ukrainians living in Russia, I know it from my communication with them, to openly discover their Ukrainian identity is not affordable, not comfortable, and sometimes dangerous. I mean, for some. I don't like to discuss something about that in anecdotic manner, but it's well known. And in the same time, I would say that I never asked Ukrainians in Ukraine about their perception with regard to. So the clear message of Russian government is the proposal for Ukrainians there to be Russified as soon as possible and completely, to be Russians. And many of them voluntarily or involuntarily transferred themselves towards new Russians in Russia. So Ukrainian communities there is degrading in any sense. And how Ukrainians react to that? I saw a lot of criticism towards the Ukrainian government and NGOs for their lack of support of our competitors in Russia, especially in Western Siberia, in the Far East, Дальний Восток, and in the central Russia too, including St. Petersburg and Moscow. Ukrainian did, and still, well, now it's just hardly possible, very few real steps to support our competitors there. That's true too. Not only there, because when I dealt with these issues, I mean, interesting relations in Chernivtsi region, and had to be in a permanent correspondence and communication with central government, the Office of Vice Minister in charge of humanitarian issues. So I saw the whole spectra of Ukrainian state policy towards new diaspora. I mean, Russia, Belarus, for me especially because of Chernivtsi region, Moldova and Romania. And I have to say that it was mainly shameful approach. Some symbolic actions, but no real support, if even to compare with Russian support, Hungarian support, and Romanian support. It's shameful. But my conclusion is just shameful position.
Thank you.
Just a quick question. First of all, thank you for this interesting presentation. And because I'm very close with my research and geography to the Chernivtsi, but I have a different sort of question. I just don't understand. Census of Soviet Union 1989.
Yes.
Then the other one 2001. Then it didn't happen in 2011. My question, I'm asking myself, how could a government govern a country with millions of people without statistic data about the country? It's related to economics, politics, everything. So my question is, do you think in a few days we have Ukraine has elections of president?
Yeah.
Then in the fall, Rada elections.
Right.
Okay.
That's true.
So, and then the government, all these things. What do you think, how soon on the government agenda will be this issue of census? It's a rhetoric question. I
No,
understand,
it's not rhetoric. It's a very practical question with a good ground for this further discussion. I explain my perception. And even more, I'd like to stress that this is my position not now, but from the 2011 and later years. Moreover, being a head of the so-called think chamber in the Chernivtsi regional administration, I put this question into the discussion agenda, and by the way, addressed to some other my colleagues from Eastern Ukraine, but that's included, and we protested against postponing this census. That is reflected in the internet. It could be very, very easily checked out. Mm-hmm. So, my point is the same as you expressed right now. How government could manage with the country without this provable data. There are a lot of explanations except the Russian track, you know. Another explanation is the manipulations with voters. Unfortunately, our government used to use different manipulations, including the so-called dead souls. Chichikov, remember? Мертвые души, yeah? Dead souls. So, and because we don't have this provable data, accessible data, so we could manipulate this list of voters, with whatever. And again, not only with that, with social aid, subsidies, and any. So this is a big hidden black economy of government, unfortunately.
just to add, in Moldova there was a census in 2004, then 2014, and then from 2014 was released to the public 3 years or 3 years later, and then it was made public null, like cancelled,
Yeah.
not correct. So again, it's something similar with Ukraine.
And plus, to add on with this issue, yeah, I would like to add that for now the government is trapped with a very what's the called the position, yeah. But what the reason is? First of all, we have a great immigration from Ukraine, and to recognize it in full scale, it is a kind of a national catastrophe for the government, especially on the eve of the elections. That's one reason. The second reason is that if we do census right now, I mean this year or next year, how to deal with the Crimea and temporarily occupied territory? Should it be done without them? It could be treated as a kind of making them legitimized as not our territories.
Transnistria.
Yes. So far we have a very uncomfortable position with regard to the new census. Very uncomfortable.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? One more question.
Of your,
Yeah.
my pleasure.
So, who is going to be
Okay.
I just, it's a good question. It's a very point. You are, just looking at the researches and plus schools and some expertise and whatever, who are leaders, so to say, due to the preliminary expectations of sociologists. We have trio of leaders. Yeah, we have Zelensky, Poroshenko, and Tymoshenko. We'll see what happens because depending on who will run the second tour, it will be quite a different composition. It seems that the second tour is inevitable for Ukraine, and somebody of this trio could be the participants of the second tour. But who will win then finally, this is an open question. And even more, the phenomenon of Zelensky, it is a phenomenon of the many faceted, event or just reasons. But the very problem is that the major part of Ukrainian society are very much disappointed with the ruling elite at all. With this relatively old, because they are not so old in age, but for them, the public perception, the public opinion, and in media representation, they are old, enough. And they are in the politics at least since the late 90s, So far, and Zelensky seems to be a kind of newcomer, and very many people with a low critical thinking expect that he could change the system, which is very naive, but in the same time, this is a diagnosis for the society and political elite.
But it seems like Mr. Poroshenko is the only one who is playing with ethnicity, Vira, Mova.
That's right. If we are speaking about the primordial values, he used to play with them. Because neither Zelensky nor Tymoshenko are very much concerned. And I saw in Ukraine, traveling all around Ukraine, that for instance, when I entered Ivan-Frankivsk, I saw there Yulia with slogans, go invest, European, Euro-Atlantic integration. But when I entered Poltava and Kharkiv, I saw only social agenda of her side. So this is trickery, this is a manipulative campaign, but a very bad thing is a great number of samples of Russian interference there, and their first come is marching to Kiev, unfortunately. So we'll see. But the situation is pretty alarming, I would say, in the most calm words.
Yeah, I see.
Maybe I will just narrow it in this question again, because I have some ideas about the phenomenon of Zelensky.
Right.
Of course, except of these protest attitudes of his supporters, there is probably one issue could be directly related to your topic, because part of his supporters who are they are also critical maybe against Poroshenko, but they are part of people who could not accept this kind of, I would say, very active Ukrainization in Ukraine.
That's true.
And he's playing, actually, that's why I would not agree with you that he is not touching it directly. but actually he attracts those people who are unhappy with decommunization and in this way or in this form, and also language policy. So
I agree that the social base or ground for his support is Russophones, urban population, the most Russified, and which are consumerist, universal consumerist. For them, these values like Thomas, Vera, Mova, and so on, it's nothing. They want to see refrigerator full, salary growing up, and for sure, the appeal of Zelensky to kneel before Putin and praying for the peace in Ukraine, it is their belief too.
but also there is element of like multiculturality, because for some young people who support him, it's kind of like they are not really care, because it's kind of old-fashioned, concepts about identity, about ethnicity, and even language, etc. And they are partly like belongs to those all topics which you touched in sense of like.
Well, it is a topic about the virtuality of politics.
Yeah.
It's a very because his own image of the Holoborodko, which substituted the reality of Zelensky. This is the main message from his side, and this is a very clever political technology and trickery with the voters. And many of the voters are naive enough, not only because of their expectations, but they are naive enough to consume that image as a truth.
Yeah, of course.
That's a lot of issues, but it is indicating. It's awfully indicating that the part of Ukrainian society remains paternalistic, naive, in the same time believing in the folk tales, but new urban folk tales, not old-fashioned peasantry folk tales.
Similar to reality,
Yeah.
right? Okay, since we have no other questions, let me thank you again for your presentation. I learned a lot, and
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your comment, for your attention, for your support, and for your participation.